everybody. We are here on the podcast. You got Eric Worrell and Stephen White here at the RentPrep offices. How you doing today, Steve?
Doing really well. This is a big episode for me because this is my opportunity to even the score here. All right, I'm 1-2 on Balderdash. I didn't have a great, started out 0-2, picked two wrong stories as the correct, true landlord story. Last one, I picked up a victory. I'm definitely in it for the win this time. I'm going to even my score up to 2-2.
Well, Steve, I feel like, you're guessing with the heart early on, and you're like, I hope that one's not true. And then, your heart led you to defeat. So, well, you got to blend it, heart and mind.
I know. Just like we tell landlords, take the emotional aspect out of it. And I'm going to do it on this one. I'm removing the emotional side of my reasoning and rationale.
This is Landlord Balderdash, the game where you guess which landlord story is real and which one is Balderdash.
All right, I'm going to start here. We got our first story. These are two shorter ones, so you're going to have to listen closely. All right, first story. Tenants lived upstairs for 3 months, didn't pay the third month's rent, called in as me to cut off my utilities, reported me to Children's Division for child abuse, moved out leaving 18 bags of garbage, and reported me to the fire department for the garbage hazard. That sounds pretty brutal.
Sounds pretty real, but yeah, it is brutal.
All right.
Yep.
All right. The second story. When I first started a few years ago with rentals, I provided my home address so tenants could send payment. I had a tenant that moved in from out of state, and a week into him living there, I received a strange package at my home. It had marijuana in it, shipped from California, and I was beyond confused and took it to the local police. They were able to track down the sender and intended delivery. They figured out that this tenant was so baked or gave his dealer the home address instead of his new rental address, and I no longer provide my address to tenants now.
Okay. Second one sounds pretty believable too. I don't think that's anything out of the ordinary, but man, I feel like the first one is the true story. It's my gut feeling on this. I've seen these situations before where it gets personal. The tenant starts attacking the landlord in ways where they're calling authorities for one reason or another. In this case, I think you mentioned it was child services, right? Mm-hmm. That's not out of the stretch of reality whatsoever, unfortunately. And I feel like that is definitely the real story here.
Well, Steve, I'm sorry to say this, but you were 500.
2-2.
Yes, you are.
I picked it right. All right.
You got it right. Yep. The story of, just to rehash that, tenant that lived upstairs for 3 months didn't pay the rent. And then they called in as the landlord to cut off the utilities for the landlord, reported them to Children's Division of Child Abuse, and then left 18 bags of garbage. And this is the one that I think was creative on their part. You got to give props to the tenant here.
Yeah.
They left the garbage and then reported them to the fire department for garbage hazard. That's a malicious move right there.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes you just see some downright, despicable things being done, and people get pretty creative with ways to really jam somebody up. I mean, it's not the old days where you can go punch somebody in the face. So now you have to find creative ways to mess with them. And unfortunately, tenants are pretty darn good at it.
I like your depiction of being a landlord in the old days. You just punch somebody in the face, or the tenant just punches somebody. Like, it wasn't a duel like a Western.
No.
You both take 10 paces and then you punch each other in the face.
Well, yeah. I mean, I feel like nowadays, obviously, that stuff doesn't fly for good reason. I'm not defending it that, it should be like the old days when you could punch somebody in the face. But there are definitely times where you feel like, man, I wish we could deal with this the old way. In this case, this is somebody who, in my opinion, the tenant, I'm sure, this is not the first time they've done this. Mm-hmm. This is not the first rodeo for them and trying to ruin somebody's life in that way. And how many landlords are out there listening are shocked by the lack of phone verifications you get from your previous tenants, right? So when you're accepting a new applicant or a new tenant, you're going to call their previous landlords and hopefully find stuff out like this. Or if the tenant's crazy enough to list their landlord, you'll actually talk to that person and find this story out firsthand. Or if the tenant's lying and they list their friend's phone number and, you're savvy enough to catch that. So I know a lot of landlords that we talk to are shocked by the lack of phone verification calls they get on previous tenants. So, that tells me do your homework, do your diligence. You're screening somebody, make sure you're talking to that previous landlord, and probably even more importantly, the landlord 2 times ago, right? Not the one that they're currently renting from, but the one before that. So you know what kind of condition they left the property or how they exited that relationship. Super important stuff not to be skipped over.
Yeah, and reading into this, the true story here, you can tell from this story that the tenant, it must have been a multi-unit because they said that the tenant had lived upstairs. So if you are in that situation where you're a landlord and you have a tenant that lives upstairs, I am not going to suggest how you do your tenant screening as far as your rules and regulations, but I would say look up the Mrs. Murphy law. I believe I'm saying that right,
Yeah.
Steve? Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, in a nutshell, it allows a little bit of looser regulatory, restrictions if you're owner occupied.
Yep.
So, you can, this is going to come out wrong. I don't want to say you can discriminate, but there are, again, looser regulations on the discriminatory screening practices if you're in a situation where you're owner occupied.
Yeah, which I think is kind of a weird law, to be honest. I mean, it's great that it kind of does actually loosen up some restrictions for landlords, but it does seem kind of weird that it's like, oh, you can like discriminate or whatever word you want to use or just loosen the restrictions when you live there. But then when you move out, then you have to, play things how they're supposed to be.
Right.
It's kind of strange. But in this situation, that is something that if I was to, rewind the clocks for this landlord, I would say, hey, check out Mrs. Murphy's Law. Yeah. Look that up online. Get to know that. And then make sure that you're screening your tenants correctly. I mean, we don't want to turn this into like a plug for RentPrep, but it's extremely important, especially when you live in the unit with the tenants, because now it's not just that you have bad tenants, you also have bad neighbors. So it's kind of a double whammy if you're going to live in a multi-unit, or even worse, I've seen situations reading blog comments and whatnot of people who rent out a room in their apartment, and they run into the same issues. If you're going to do something like that, or if you own a single home and you want to rent out a room, 100% make sure you do a thorough background check and you do a good screening on that tenant that's going to live with you.
No question. And I can almost guarantee if you dug out who the actual landlord was, and we got that landlord on the phone right now, and I asked the landlord, how did you screen this tenant? I guarantee that their screening procedures weren't very solid, because this does not come across as a tenant that this is the first time they're being they're being difficult, or the first landlord that they're giving a hard time. This is somebody who is a professional tenant. They know what's going on. They know how to jam somebody up. They've thought this through. They've put a lot of time into thinking about it, unfortunately. So I can guarantee that landlord wishes they can go back and do screening better next time, and they probably wouldn't have even chosen that person.
So the second story here, I'll kind of put you on the spot here, Steve.
Yeah.
As far as like accepting rental payments, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions? Because in this particular made-up story, the tenant got confused on if which address was theirs and which one was the landlord's because they were moving in. But do you have any suggestions as far as like best practices if you're accepting rental payments from tenants and you don't want to disclose your home address?
So I think some of this comes down to a generational thing, right? I'm pushing 40 years old, and I can definitely remember a time where I would pay for groceries with a check, or go into the mall and shop at a store and pay with a check.
I don't know what you're talking about, but keep going.
I know, right? So nowadays, like, checks are non-existent. Matter of fact, I was looking for my checkbook the other day, and I had looked in the registry and saw I wrote 3 checks in all of 2016. I mean, that's pretty crazy, right? So times have changed. Checks are a pretty inefficient way to collect rent. Eric, I know that you use Venmo and like it very much.
Well, oddly enough, I do use Venmo, and I'm curious as to what the issue is, because I have 5 tenants that pay me through Venmo, and 4 of them, no problem this last month. One of them was having an issue with it. And I don't know how to troubleshoot it because I'm not sure what he's seeing. So he ended up dropping off a check at my house. And it's been sitting on my table for, I think, about 10 days now. Yeah. And it's like a chore. It's a chore sitting on my table. I'm looking at that, and it makes me feel like such a privileged American that I get to look at money sitting on my table and just get so upset by it. Like, are you kidding me? I got to go cash this check.
It's an inconvenience to write checks, cash checks. And again, I know it might be a generational thing. I know that there's plenty of landlords that still, this is their primary way of doing it. You know what? I will say this. When it comes to accepting application fees, I do like the use of checks for this particular reason. let's say that you have an open house and you get 10 people that fill out applications in full and they write you a check for the application fee of, let's say, $35. You go home, you
and
start.
that application fee is just so people can run a background check?
Yeah, usually. Yeah. I mean, if they're not and they're just taking the application fee, then, I mean, which is fine and legal. Some states may require that the application fee be solely used for background checks. So definitely depending on your state. But if you've got a pile of 10 checks and 10 applications and you start going through those applications and 7 of them immediately, for whatever reason, you identify as probably not going to make the cut.
Smokers, and you say no smokers at this property.
Right. It could be something as easy as that. It could be maybe they've admitted to having evictions, or maybe they're in the middle of a bankruptcy and you don't want to have that headache as their new landlord and dealing with that. Whatever the reasoning is, let's say that immediately you just identify applications without having to run the background check that these people are not going to qualify. Don't take their money and cash their check. And at least having a check, that transaction hasn't actually occurred yet, you can always either send it back or tell them you're going to rip it up and not take it. And then that way you're not dealing with the problem that we do see a lot of landlords run into, where you're taking money from people and they feel like they've just been robbed because you didn't even run their background check or their credit or anything like that. So checks do potentially have a place. Like I said, in that scenario, it makes things a little easier. As far as rent payments, to me, it's a pain in the neck.
Yeah.
For sure, you know?
And if you're curious as far as your state on what are the rules and regulations as far as, can you accept, these, do you have to give back the application fee and things like that? You can go on our site. We've been curating every single state. If you go to the landlord resources, you'll see state specific resources as the drop down option. And then from that, you can get to your specific state's post. And there's a ton of information in there for you, your state and screening regulations. And for most of them, I'm pretty sure all of them that we're putting together so far, it'll have information on what the legal amount is that you can charge an application fee and if you have to return it or not. So
it'll also mention, since we're talking about checks, each of them have the regulation on how to handle bad checks as well. So some states deal with it as a criminal offense, especially because you're dealing with a very high amount typically with rent. So you're dealing with a much larger amount. In that case, you're looking at an actual criminal offense of theft. So, you definitely want to know in your state how to handle it, especially if you're handling checks. If that person bounces a check or mismanages their funds or whatever, how are you going to handle that? What fees can you impose on them? Each state is specific about the bad check fees that you can charge and how to handle them.
And I will say, kind of going back to the Venmo conversation, if you're not familiar, it's actually, I think it was a company that was started just like any other company. It was a startup, and then PayPal purchased them. And it's funny because it's the same thing as PayPal. It's the exact same thing, except that Venmo turned it into like more of a social app. And this kind of blew my mind. I was kind of, joking and ragging on Steve for approaching 40 here. I'm 31 right now as recording this, and some of my tenants were the ones that brought Venmo to my attention, and they're mid-20s. And it's just such a generational gap of that, because you've got me by 6-7 years, right? And then I've got my tenants by 6 years. And I'm going on here, and I made sure everything I have on there is private. I don't want people knowing anything, and I'm kind of more old school like that. And then they're sending rent payments, and it's got like a little emoji of like a dollar bill flying, and it has the home. So like all their friends can see how much they pay in rent. So you should know that it can be a little strange in that regards. And it's really weird because I'm looking at this, and the emojis that they're using on, because I can see all their history, and I think one of them had a plant on there, and I'm like, oh man, is that for pot? Like, and it's just so strange to me. I know there's really no landlord lesson with this particularly. I just find it really odd that people want to make what they're paying for like public knowledge like that.
That is a generational thing. I can't even fathom it. We were just talking before we went live on this about being irresponsible with social media and people posting that they're leaving for a vacation, or you had mentioned you're selling a TV on Craigslist, and very smartly you're not giving out your address or meeting with people until you're home and not at work. You don't want to give your address out and have them come to your house and know that you're working and steal the TV from you anyway.
Do you remember the name of the character from Catch Me If You Can? The Leonardo
DiCaprio guy? No, I don't remember his name.
I can't either. I know he got his dad, Christopher Walken, in there.
Yeah.
But somebody that I used to work with, he's a CEO of a federal credit union. Mm-hmm. And he went to a national conference down in D.C. He goes every single year. Really nice guy. His name's Al. And he said at the conference that guy spoke.
Yeah.
Because, it's a true story. He was, forging checks and doing all that type of stuff, was going to go to prison for a long time, and then ended up getting a job from the government because he was the best at what he did.
Yeah.
And he said, he's like, in today's day and age, he's like, the number one thing I can give you is do not supply your birth date and your real name on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, like somebody who's got that kind of credential and that kind of clout as far as, online security and theft and things of that nature.
Yep.
I think after I heard that, I did go to my Facebook profile and I took my birthday off there. I'm like, that is crazy. Like that's an identifying factor. You know?
For sure. Well, now you work at a background check company and you know that there's really 3 main identifying factors: name, date of birth, social. And if you have any combination of those, we can usually find the rest.
So you're saying I should go on my Facebook right now and remove my Social Security from there too?
Yes. Well, and all joking aside, I couldn't tell you how many times. Back when we first started RentPrep, going back to 2007, social media was all pretty new.
You were on Google Plus.
Yeah. MySpace. Yeah. But I remember we used to have social media verification as part of our services. We can no longer do it. Honestly, it's too cumbersome. I definitely recommend landlords, though, as part of your screening process, check out their Facebook pages. I would find that usually the people who have no business making their Facebook public do.
Yeah.
Right? So the people who should not make it public are always the ones that do make it public. Bad judgment just seems to be...
Well, it's like maybe their profile picture, it's them doing a keg stand.
Sure.
And you're like, you know what? I have a feeling that guy might not be the best renter for this apartment.
Right. Well, one thing that we used to see a lot of was people would literally scan a picture of their driver's license and put that in their Facebook feed. And I'd be like, why would you have a copy of your driver's license with nothing blocked out? You'd see the driver's license ID, their date of birth, everything. I mean, it's your driver's license.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you how common that was. It was mind-boggling to me that people would do that.
Yeah, I think I just saw this on Facebook the one day when I was on the feed on the book, and it was a picture of a girl who had posted a picture, and she's very proudly holding up her credit card and doing the selfie or whatever. And the caption that she supplied with it was, "Can't believe I got my last credit card hacked, but I got my new one in."
Hideous.
And the comments underneath these pictures were hysterical.
I can imagine.
And you feel bad because you're like, you know what? She's still a kid. She's like 18, getting her first credit card.
Yeah.
You like to think that she should know this. But somewhere along the line, there was a parent that, probably wasn't involved enough with this person's life.
For sure. You gotta, use it to your advantage if you're a landlord. Go on Facebook, check your people out, look for the details, not necessarily the selfie that they're taking, but look beyond that and see the walls, the condition of the place they're living in. Is there a hole kicked in the wall somewhere? I couldn't tell you how many times we would spot that and report that to the landlord and say, look here's 10 pictures of a party they had in their house. And if you look beyond the keg stands and the selfies, look at the walls, look at the condition of the place, look around. So
because their friend thinks it's funny, they take a picture and they tag them in it. And then it's incriminating if you're looking at that as a landlord for sure.
Absolutely. And we do the same thing here, in what we're doing, not for on the tenant screening side, because we don't offer the social aspect of it anymore, but even for hiring new screeners or new applicants. Social media is one of the first things that an employer is going to look at. Mm-hmm. And you're looking for not necessarily, it is content related, but more than anything, you're looking at what kind of judgment this person has.
Sure.
You know what I mean? What are they posting? Are they that type of person that's posting a picture of themselves with their credit card? Yeah. That's not the kind of person I want to ever hire to has that terrible of judgment.
Or are they posting every 7 minutes?
Yeah.
And you're like, you know what? This is going to be somebody that's going to sit here on their phone all day.
Right. Yeah. A lot of good points. How do we even get started on this?
I don't know. I think it's Landlord Balderdash. Are you 2 and 2? Is that what it is?
I'm 2 and 2. A lot of great landlord tips tucked into this episode for sure. I know we kind of got off onto a tangent here talking about different things, but just a lot of good information for landlords. If you're still the type of landlord that collects checks, my recommendation would be know your state's rules and regulations about how to handle bad checks and bad check fees and application fees and those type of things, and consider spending a little bit of time and looking how to phase accepting checks out of your business practice, because in the very near future, in my opinion, that is going to be completely dead.
Yeah, and I will say that in 2016, that was the one thing that I did in my rental business that was the best move.
Yeah.
Just what it does is it makes it easier for your tenant to pay, because it is just like pretty much a few clicks of a button. It's on their phone.
Yep.
And now I'm just getting a text message just saying, hey, so-and-so paid, so-and-so paid, so-and-so. And it's so amazing, because I'm not sitting there thinking about when do I need to remind them?
Yeah.
When do I just let it go and let them pay. And it's just kind of takes a whole layer out of it for me. So I've really enjoyed having that set up as a service.
It's funny to me too. You mentioned that, I've read a lot about accepting online payments, the pros, the cons. Overwhelmingly, the biggest negative, even for landlords, about accepting payments through services like Venmo or Stripe or Dwala is another one. The biggest negative feedback that you'll get if you research these is that it takes several days to process. Now, some services are certainly faster than others, right? However, I present the argument that if you're accepting a check, unless you're going to the bank of which the check is written on and you're providing identification and cashing it, which I don't imagine many landlords doing. That's a giant pain. Usually you're just depositing it. It's going to take several days to clear anyway. And you're always running that risk that it's not going to clear.
Yeah.
So to me, I don't think that's even a valid argument to say, well, it takes a couple of days. How long does the Venmo take? 3 days, I think?
You know what? Honestly, this is kind of sad. I don't even know. I'm not somebody who's living,
Right.
Immediately taking that money and going to the grocery store.
Sure.
Maybe I should be more aware of that. But the one thing about Venmo, though, I will say from researching is that some landlords have said that who have a lot of properties, that Venmo will tag the account to make it a business account. So if you're somebody who's maybe got 50 properties and they see these continual monthly payments coming through, you might have some extra charges thrown on top of it. In my particular situation where I've just got 5 tenants paying me on there, I haven't had anything flagged. As far as I know, I'm not violating any kind of agreement with the service. Hopefully I'm not,
Who pays the fees if you get switched to a business account? Is it the landlord?
I think the landlord, the person that's receiving. I think there's a fee involved with it. But right now there's no fees. I'm getting the money in. I'm not having to, for whatever reason, it's just the hurdle for the tenant is lower now. Yeah. So I'm not hassling them for money because it's so easy. So the easier you can make it for your tenant to pay you, the less hassle it is, the less, you're sitting there stressing out on the second, third, fourth, fifth of the month, like I have been in the past. So. And
we talk a lot about landlords and treating what they're doing as a business, right? And in any business, you want to create systems to make things easier and to free up your time. And, that time that you might spend going to the bank on a monthly basis to handle rent payments or thinking about it in that way, how much better could your time be used?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To do anything else. Whether it be personal or business related. So to me, that's a system that should be in place to really streamline things and make things easier for landlords anyway. So if you don't do it, look into it. I'm telling you, it's worth it. Eric will tell you firsthand too, from somebody who just switched, it's worth it.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Thanks for listening in, and congratulations, Steve, on your being 2-2 now. And
2-2, baby.
Balderdash. I'm sure we got a tiebreaker coming up soon, so we'll see how it goes.
I'm ready for it.
All right. Take care, everyone.